I'm joined now by Lorcan McCabe, the Deputy President of the ICMSA, and Karen Duplo, Cattle Specialist at Teagasc Moor Park. Karen, there is a fodder shortage in some parts of the country, but has the good weather in recent weeks alleviated the situation?
Yeah, to some degree it has, particularly in certain locations where there's been extra round bales being made, particularly in areas like West Cork, which had a significant deficit. They've made up some of the ground, but I suppose what I would ask people would be still to sit down and look at what silage they have, what stock they're going to carry over the winter, and do the sums now rather than later. We have figures from a September survey, which was done, I suppose, just before that spell of good weather, and half of the farmers surveyed in that had about a 20-25% deficit. So there's likely to be deficits in areas, particular pockets, and even talking to some farmers in Cork, many farmers are short that 20-30%, and just to make plans now rather than leaving it till January and February would be our message.
Lorcan, what about your members? What are they saying? How prepared are farmers, do you think, at this stage now when we're looking at bringing cattle in over the next few weeks?
Yeah, well, you know, Karen and our colleagues in Teagasc has, since the beginning of the summer, they have pulled out all the stops to tell farmers what to do and encourage them to grow extra fodder. On the ground, I suppose, our members, if you come up, we'll say, me, Cavan, Monaghan and the whole west of Ireland, they seem to be okay. And while I say they're okay, especially after us getting the last 2 months of excellent weather. There's a lot of round bales has been made since we wouldn't have expected since the 1st of September. They are, with a little bit of the right work, they're okay. Heading down further, Kilkenny, Wexford, Waterford, parts of North Cork, Laois especially too, they're not over the hump yet, and they need to conserve fodder. They need to, as Karen said too, they have to get it right before Christmas. And the message is going out to them, and a lot of them is getting there, but there is going to be farmers that is going to be 20% short. And you know, they have to act very, very quick. You know, it has to be done in everyone's opinion, and Karen too, it has to be done before Christmas, because you can't start stretching, especially on dairy farms, when cows start calving, they have to get full food and full production. The other thing too we've been saying, and Karen may be going into more detail, is that, you know, the feeding space. When you're stretching ration, you have to have the space for every cow to eat, to give her the amount, you know, especially when the cow is dry, give her the amount of silage restricted, and some extra feed, we say extra nuts or whatever, concentrates, you know. But in general, people does realise the problem, but it has alleviated an awful lot since the 1st of September. At the 1st of September, we were in dire straits, but you know, it has alleviated an awful lot since that.
Karen, there's been a lot of silage cutting and baling even in recent weeks, quite unusual into October. What about the quality of the fodder that's out there, the other options that farmers might be looking at? Should farmers be concerned, or what advice would you give them on how to check for quality?
Yeah, I suppose the obvious thing is to go and get that silage tested so that you know what DMD it is, and then you can put the correct level of meal feeding with that. And as Lorcan was saying, you might be adding on top of that meal feeding further when you're restricting the silage. So get it tested as the first thing, and go about doing that now to get results. If it's 6 weeks in the pit or in a bale, you can test it. I suppose 2 areas for concern with silage would be some of the stuff harvested in September that may have not got a wilt. Some of the later stuff did, and I would expect very good preservation with that. But some of the earlier stuff didn't get a wilt. It may have preservation issues due to high nitrates. So if I had that in my yard, I would be looking at feeding it earlier in the winter, because it may not hold. It may not be the best product to hold. I suppose concerns with some of the stuff that was caught early in the year would be that it went late. And likely to have higher stem quantity in it, which means it needs higher meal feeding levels to get the same level of performance. So if you're someone who's used to cutting silage in the 3rd week of May, and it got pushed out till the middle of June, you are probably looking at feeding a couple of kilos of ration per head to weanlings and calves, suckler cows, or maybe up to 3 kilos. But the first step is to get it tested so you know what you're dealing with exactly.
Lorcan, there's a section out there in the farming community who put this issue down to overstocking. What do you make of that view?
It's not overstocking because we have relatively the same stock in the country as we've had. The stock hasn't gone up that much. There is people says that, and I suppose they're fixated on the dairy farmer that has increased from 50 cows to 110. But most of them is efficient farmers, and it's all across the board. There's a shortage. I wouldn't tar them with that. Now that's not the problem. I think it's just we were after the whole wet back year, end of last year, and the late spring, and it was straight into drought this year. So no, I wouldn't put the blame on the people that has expanded now. I wouldn't do that. It's across the board, the shortage. So they are no worse relative to their size than anyone else is. The only thing is that if you have obviously 200 cows, a 10% shortfall is an awful lot less than a 10% shortfall of 50 cows. But proportionately, no, they are no worse, and I wouldn't attribute blame to them for causing the problem.
Karen, do you have a view on that? Has overstocking played a role in the current fodder shortage?
Well, obviously, as Lorcan was saying, if you have more cows and you end up with a percentage deficit, it's going to be harder to fill that gap. And in certain localities, that caused a local deficit where there was large herds in a small area buying up fodder last year. However, as Lorcan correctly pointed out, when we did the survey in September, the level of shortage was actually pretty even spread across enterprises, both beef and dairy, and across stocking weights, which is kind of surprising. But when you think about it, if farms are used to operating at a certain stocking weight, they're used to producing that much grass, and would have been all hit almost the same amount by the weather conditions to a certain percentage. So it's across the board, as Lorcan was saying.
Lorcan, a lot of farmers out there hoping for a mild, short winter ahead, but we have been hit with 2 storms already just in recent weeks. What if that doesn't happen? What if the winter is quite difficult? What if we have a repeat of last year?
Yeah, well, first of all, we're not going to have to repeat this end of the year, because we've got, even in our part of the country, neighbours says to me, we're after getting a month free without silage now. So, the foreseeable future, it looks good till the 1st of November. That's a fantastic start. I know, and you're looking at one of the farmers too, is hoping for an early spring. If the autumn is good so far, and the ground is dry, so people should be fit to graze stock up, even down in the south part of the country, possibly well on into November. I know if we get a horrendous spring with cold, wet weather, it could pose a problem. It could, because most farmers, the idea of the stakeholders group was to set up a buffer of maybe 8 weeks silage, and the way this year came, we weren't able to do that, because we went from straight into cold, wet weather to basically desert conditions in some places. So, I would be a little bit concerned that if we get a very late spring, that we could be under pressure now, we say after Patrick's Day, late March up to mid-April. There would be a concern there if we get in extremes. But look, we're after getting them, and hopefully we'll get away with them. I'd be more concerned too, possibly, with farmers that have, during the drought all year, they've exhausted their resources, as well as their feed resources, their financial resources. That's what I'd be more concerned of going on into the spring.
Can you elaborate on that?
Yeah.
Because the financial resources, the cost of all this, has been a real burden on farms over the summer months and into the autumn.
It has, and the further you go south, the worse it has been, because obviously they were buying more concentrates all summer to keep the cows going. And I think, in fairness to farmers, they have fed the cows well. You hear rumours of cows being thin, but in general, cows is coming into the end of the year in great condition, and milk is up all over the country. So the farmers has done their part. They've kept the milk up, they've kept the cows fed well, but that's been at a cost. In some cases now, and up until recently, there didn't seem to be any pull extra on the overdraft, but we'll be concerned that there would be, that all things has to be paid within the year, contractors, everything will be paid from now on, basically, and that there'll be a little bit of concern that come on the spring, you have the lapse, we say farmers dry the cows, you have the lapse of no money coming in for maybe January and February, that we would be a little bit concerned that the people that were stretched during the summer, they might have financial problems. Now, we've talked to all the banks, and all the banks have packages out there, and I think are quite willing to deal with farmers. And the message I'd like to put forward here is that the two messages, I suppose, and as Karen had, check this, the amount of silage you have, the quality of silage you have. If you have a problem, correct it as soon as possible. And the other thing is, if you see you have a problem with finance, go to your banks now, straight away, and don't just get X amount to keep you going till Christmas. Do a complete review and make yourself, we say, financially solid until the cream checks comes in next March. And talking to banks, look, we all live out about them and we have problems with them, but they are quite willing to deal with farmers and not come for some today and then at Christmas we say run out and come back again. That both on the feed budget and the financial budget, I think the message should be to sit down and do it now. And look at Teagasc and your advisors will do that and are, in my opinion, doing an excellent job on it.
Karen, finally, just what actions can farmers take now or in the next few weeks if they're short on forage?
I suppose there's a few things we can look at doing. As Lorcan says, we've had a great autumn, so we can set up the farm now to stay out grazing as long as we can and still set up the farm to get out early in the spring. So that's using the autumn planner to use what grass is there. So we're looking at closing up the farm in rotation, grazing and closing, and having about half of the farm closed by the 1st of November and not going back into that again until the spring. And that way we're extending the grazing both ways, but you can't do that unless you close in rotation. So that's the first thing I would look at, is the grass side of the house. Then you're looking at establishing what the deficit is. So that's counting up bales, measuring the pit and testing your silage so you know what feed you have in the yard. The next step is looking at the number of animals you have. Count out the number of months your winter is likely to be, the number of animals, do a budget. If you realise then you're short, you're looking at, I suppose, three main options. You're looking at buying in extra fodder, such as silage or hay if you can get it. Or you're looking at doing what Lorcan is talking about, saying, okay, I have 70% of what I need. So if I start stretching the silage now and restricting it at the start of the housing period and adding an extra meal, I can make that existing silage go a bit further. The final thing then to look at is stock. Are you carrying passengers that you don't need to house for the winter? There's still empty suckler cows being carried on farms. Should they be sold and the money freed up to buy extra meal to feed the animals that are already there? And as Lorcan was saying, all of this has to be done within a budget. What money have you available to you? If you're going to be short cash for the winter, do something about it now. If it means clearing a stocking loan, starting again, or looking at your overdraft facilities, whatever can be managed to make sure that you don't hit the wall in January.
We'll leave it there. Thank you both very much for coming in to us. Now we're off to the Burren, where Sylvester Phelan caught up with one Clare farmer who's preparing to drive his cattle from the lowlands up to the highlands for winter grazing.